man, the Star Trek franchise has really taken the prosper part of live long and prosper to heart, aren't they? Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and for today's video, I want to just sit back and kind of have a fun video where I get to talk about my favorite thing, Star Trek, because this past weekend, I got to attend the San Diego Comic-Con convention that happens every year, and of course, as there typically is nowadays, there was a ton of Star Trek news and presence at the event that I just want to talk about, and just, I haven't had a lot of time to talk about ongoing Star Trek stuff because I've been busy with my own movie and my own life and stuff going on, getting engaged, all that jazz. So now that I have a little bit more free time, I just want to just sit and chill and chat about stuff that I love and all the news and what I'm excited for and what I'm, worried and tepid about with the Star Trek franchise going forward, because there's certainly a lot to talk about. So let's get into it. Before I dive completely into it, though, I will say one of the things that they showed at the Star Trek panel that they did in Hall H was a clip for Star Trek Strange New Worlds upcoming season 3. And I had a lot of thoughts about that clip, as did a lot of the internet, and not particularly good thoughts, in fact, very negative thoughts, so much so that I needed to rant about it on its own terms. So to keep this video under an hour long, and also to sort of keep the most negative stuff out of what I want to hopefully be a more fun video, I've made a separate video that I'll put up over here for you to talk about that, because I do think that that's something that we need to talk about in a more, getting really into the nitty gritty of it level, then this more fun. Let's talk about the news video will warrant. So I'm going to leave Strange New Worlds off to the side. Go check out that video for that news, and we're going to talk about everything else. So before we get into the actual news stuff, let's talk about the activations that were on site, because some of them are really, really interesting to me. The first one was in the actual con itself. They had a menagerie sort of installation there that was really cool. You could go into it, and they had a bunch of Star Trek aliens from a bunch of different eras of Star Trek. They even had a full salt vampire from the original series episode in there, and a bunch of different videos, tribbles, of course, and the parasite from Wrath of Khan. It was very, very fun. I really did enjoy this. The one weird thing to me about it is that, and we'll talk a little bit more about Lower Decks later, is that this menagerie is very much based on the Lower Decks menagerie that appeared in season 4, and it's just always weird to me when they cancel a show and then they make a whole activation about the show that's canceled, because it's this weird thing of we're gonna sort of merchandise and profit off of this thing that we're sort of shoving off to the side, that we're not sort of continuing, especially since there is a desire for Lower Decks to continue. Again, we'll talk about that more later. And I know there were some people who worked on Star Trek Lower Decks. Jean Kang, who is a assistant director on that show, sort of expressed online some of her, just full admission, Jean is a friend of mine, but I didn't talk with her about this tweet or that I was going to share it, but I wanted to give her thoughts on it. So just her sharing her thoughts on, feeling a bit of mixed feelings on, the way the industry is right now, where a lot of things are getting canceled. It's hard for her to find work. And then, these big corporations coming in and profiting off of that. So it was a little bit of a weird thing there. I'm not gonna. This is how business stuff goes to a degree, but I also know that there's, especially given where Hollywood is as an industry right now, and the sort of mistreatment of artists, and especially working class creative folks, as we've seen with the WGA strikes and SAG strikes, and even the ongoing SAG strike in the video game industry, which is sort of tangential but similarly related to it. I think it's worth bringing up. So that's something just to mention. The other interesting aspect, though, and I'll talk about this too, is they had a Star Trek Doctor Who museum thing together that was called Friendship is Universal, sort of in celebration in their intergalactic friendship day thing that they're doing. Obviously a very corporate marketing thing. But what was interesting about this was that it was Star Trek and Doctor Who doing this together. And I think a lot of people saw that. Russell T Davies, the showrunner of Doctor Who, has been very overt about wanting to be in Star Trek and being a big Star Trek fan and wanting to do a crossover between Doctor Who and Star Trek. And so that was a lot of just talk. And so from that to them they're doing this brand activation on site of showing off Star Trek and Doctor Who stuff together. They even had a poster that they gave out from it, and friendship bracelets and stuff. So again, very corporate synergy sort of stuff, but an interesting sort of thing to sort of say oh, there's an avenue here for that Doctor Who Star Trek crossover, which honestly feels like it would be a very fun thing to do. Crossovers to me, I'm always a bit worried on, because they do sort of sometimes reek of that well, we need 2 IPs to mash together so we can sell more stuff, and that's always been what crossovers are, but usually you'd hope there'd be a bit more of a creative impetus. But seeing stuff I don't know, Ready Player One, or that Space Jam movie, where it's just we're just gonna shove a bunch of IP together, who cares, feels very shallow and very nihilistic. But On a positive note, I actually do feel that there's Doctor Who and Star Trek. They even did a comic years ago that I really, really loved called The Simulation 2 with the 11th Doctor meeting the Next Generation crew and the Borg and the Cybermen teaming up together. It was a very fun comic, and it just feels like a very natural, like Doctor Who and Star Trek have very similar ethoses as franchises of like very hopeful looks on the future, very also structurally they're very episodic depending on the show. So I really think like a Strange New Worlds Doctor Who crossover feels like a very natural thing, and this was reiterated by the fact that they actually had a panel at the con where Alex Kurtzman, who was the showrunner, sort of the executive producer of all of Star Trek, and Russell T Davies, who's the showrunner and executive producer of all of the Doctor Who stuff, sort of had a panel together. And I actually attended the panel, and it was a really great one. The vibe that I got from it was like, it was just a fun thing for the two of them to do. Russell is obviously very much a fan of Star Trek. Alex Sherman seems to be very much a fan of Doctor Who, Russell T Davies. Like, they talked a lot about like a mutual adoration between the franchises, and it felt very much less of a corporate like, oh, here mandated, we're doing the sponsorship thing, and much more of like these two writers really appreciate their work in science fiction. And I thought that was actually like I just haven't really seen panels like that before that were sort of like corporate branded and yet felt very, and from these like very big showrunners within the space, and yet feeling very like on a creative level having mutual adoration for each other. And the end of the panel, after this whole long discussion, Russell very clearly, and I think he kind of went off book with this, very clearly kind of like, because Alex Kurtzman's a much more reserved guy, and Russell T Davies, it seems like a very boisterous man. And he just sort of like, it felt like he went off script and basically just said like, oh, if you want Doctor Who and Star Trek to cross over, there's a lot of lawyers that are going to get in the way of this, but if fans want it, it will happen. And so I really think that this was sort of a play by him and possibly even Alex Kurtzman to be like, we would love to do a crossover. Feels like a great thing, but it's going to take a lot of work to do. And so we need people to be vocal and sort of get some energy behind it to do it. And I think there's already some energy there with, again, the Doctor Who and Star Trek having an official like branded thing there. So I think there's already some of that, what is that, corporate making out that they do there. So, ultimately corporate stuff I don't really care about. Like, if they want to do brand synergy stuff, whatever. It didn't like knock my socks off. What has me more intrigued is there actually does seem to be an earnest creative push here, that like an artistic desire to, and also like Doctor Who and Star Trek I feel like is a fun crossover that I think would work very, very well. I even think there's been talk of this before, like in, I think, Star Trek Enterprise, there was like a potential Doctor Who crossover discussion at that point. I think back in the day, I'm unsure how far that went or if that was like really an earnest discussion, but it's certainly been out there before. So I would actually be kind of excited for this, and so that's someone who's been a little bit more jaded on crossovers overall. And then before we get to the big Hall H stuff, another piece of announcement is they did a Star Trek Prodigy panel as well, and they announced that season 2 of Prodigy was coming out on DVD. Awesome. I want my physical releases. I don't care about giving money to the big corporations, but the Prodigy season 2 is the only Star Trek show that did not have an announcement for like an official physical release, and I'm definitely someone who believes in physical media, so for preservation reasons, if nothing else, because we're seeing things getting deleted off of Star Trek Prodigy itself from Paramount Plus, getting deleted off of streaming services. So having physical media, I think, is really good for preservation, for people's access to these works. So glad that it got an announcement. Also, it does seem like, for those of you who don't know, Prodigy did get canceled by Paramount Plus. They took it off their service again for that sort of like, I don't know, tax break, whatever things, but it did get picked up and saved by Netflix, who sort of sponsored getting out the rest of season 2 because they were already finished and made. However, we are in this limbo where, season 2 was already being made when it was canceled. So like they just sort of released the episodes that they were finished on. We don't know if there's going to be a season 3. However, there's still potential for it, as they talked about at the panel. And again, requires fan outcry. So, and again, I'm always very much like, if it's a corporation thing that wants it, I don't give a shit. But if the creatives behind the show are like, we have story to tell, we want to be able to do more of this, I fully want to support it. So I encourage you, like, people get out there, buy the season 2 DVD, like, be vocal about like getting Prodigy made, like, support the creatives who want to tell the stories, especially in this industry. It's very difficult to get things moving nowadays. So like, please support that. Not here to support the corporation part of it, but here to support the creative part of it. Please do that if you can. Always here for Prodigy, because season 2 was like freaking fantastic. Like, check out my video reviews of it. I loved it. It was so good. Probably the best season of modern Star Trek, and I say that as a Lower Decks fan. So please, I think we should be fully supporting Prodigy. Hey, so editing Jessie here. I guess I recorded my video too soon because I recorded it Sunday to get it out for Monday, but Sunday evening, I did not realize they had some Star Trek news coming because they did the Star Trek comic book panel. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a huge fan of the Star Trek extended media, expanded universe stuff. Like, I have a literal wall of Star Trek books downstairs. It's my favorite quarter of the Star Trek universe. I'm also a big fan of the comics. And, I have a whole collection of Star Trek comics throughout the ages. It's one of the weird corners of the Star Trek universe. And recently, over the past few years, Heather Antos over at IDW has been running the Star Trek franchise there and has been doing a really great job. I've been loving the output of IDW's work so far. They've been doing some really good, like, one-off comics of Star Trek. Like, they have this Star Trek the motion picture one, like, set during the motion picture era. They have some Strange New Worlds ones they've been doing. I'm just grabbing what I have here. Not that one. They've been doing, like, one-off, like, Deep Space Nine ones. If you haven't picked up this one, the Deep Space Nine Dog of War one, it's adorable. It has a dog. Quark gets a dog, and it's actually, like, some geopolitical stuff with the Borg and the Dominion War. Really good. Wildly really good. But, like, one-off stories that they've been doing. But they've also been doing these ongoing Star Trek series, namely the main ones being Star Trek Defiant, which sort of follows Worf and Ensign Ro, B'Elanna Torres, Spock, a bunch of different eclectic Star Trek characters on the Defiant. Set after Lore's in there as well. And then they also have another one called just Star Trek that follows Captain Sisko after he returns after he came back from the wormhole in Deep Space Nine, and him with who was on that one, Scotty, a bunch of new characters that I really love, Tom Paris, bunch of other ones, things like that. And they've been doing like some crossover stuff. Shax actually appears in that one too, because my boy Shax, love Shax. And they did like Day of Blood, a crossover. So like they've been really killing it over at IDW. And doing some really good work and like doing some fun stuff with the Star Trek franchise and that corner of it. But at Comic-Con, they actually just announced that they're going to be doing an ongoing Lower Decks series, which I am very pumped about. They've done a couple Lower Decks like one-off limited run stories, like they had one with Dracula, hologram Dracula, that was a lot of fun. And then a Choose Your Own Adventure one. And then they also have a Star Trek Picard's Academy one, which is like the kids one that I actually have in the other room I'm reading now as well. So it's like Picard at the Starfleet Academy when he was young. But yeah, so a Lower Decks ongoing storyline I am here for. Now, I doubt that this is the continuation that like Mike McMahon and Alex Kurtzman were talking about during the main panel. So I'm not too worried about that. I just think this is really good. I love Lower Decks. It's my favorite aspect of it too, of Star Trek. So like to get an ongoing comic in this world, I think really works well. I think Lower Decks lends itself very well to comics. Just in terms of art style and it's sort of like more humorous bent. I think it's a perfect comic storyline for an ongoing one. So yeah, I think along with all the stuff that's been going on over at IDW, I think they're killing it. And one day I'll hopefully pitch my Star Trek Enterprise comic book limited idea to them one day. That's my dream. If anyone out there is interested, let me know. But otherwise, I'm very excited to read it and excited to see it. But this does bring us to the big news, the news that I'm sure you're here for me to talk about, which is the Hall H stuff. So let's break down all of this. I already said I'm going to sort of pass on the Strange New World stuff. Season 3's coming. We're getting more Pike's hair. I'm happy about that. I have issues with the clip they showed. Check out my video on that. Overall, though, excited for Strange New Worlds. We're getting a Season 3 and a Season 4 they announced, I think, as well. So we're getting Strange New Worlds. Excited about that. It's basically the flagship Star Trek show now that Discovery's canceled. So yeah, cool. I'm glad that seems to be doing healthy. However, this brings us to the next big announcement, which was they showed a trailer for the upcoming Star Trek Section 31 movie that they're releasing, which stars Michelle Yeoh coming back as Empress Philippa Georgiou. They announced that it's going to be set in the sort of lost era of Star Trek between the original series and the Next Generation. And what's cool about that is one of the things they're going to be doing is they're bringing in the character of Rachel Garrett, who is the captain of the Enterprise C, who we saw in the episode Yesterday's Enterprise of the Next Generation, sort of time travel episode. They're one of the best episodes of that show. So it's an era of Star Trek we haven't explored yet. It's going to be, and also like just a different aspect of Star Trek that we haven't explored yet, and getting to see characters that we haven't gotten a full like background on before. So very fun on that. I'm a little sad that it wasn't set during the the Enterprise era back with my Captain Archer. I really wanted her to like travel back in time to Archer's era, get to see the forming of the Federation and maybe Georgiou's creating Section 31, which for those of you who don't know, it's like the Black Ops. Like they do very dark stuff for Starfleet to sort of keep the Federation running, but it's like very ethically dubious stuff. like getting her, like Giorgio forming that, I think would have been a very cool idea. Or like forming it as part of the Federation Charter, because Section 31 was before that. That's nerdy nonsense, but it's there. Anyways, I wanted that. We're not getting that, but we are getting another era of Star Trek to explore. But was excited about that. But they finally showed us our first like actual trailer of it, and this looked really, really cool. We got some like casting announcements. The big one for me, I'm not gonna go through every cast member, but Sam Richardson, who many people know from Ted Lasso, love his energy. He's freaking great. So glad to see him in Star Trek. But yeah, a lot going on in this trailer. We got like a young Philippa Georgiou. We get to see her like time as Emperor. We get to sort of get the look of this like underground sort of like Section 31 Black Ops team thing that they're doing. And I have to say, I'm very, very pumped for this trailer in a lot of ways. First off, again, it's a side of Star Trek we don't get to see. I have been very much pushing for, I want to see more Star Trek that isn't Starfleet focused. The universe of Star Trek is very vast. And while I certainly understand the main focus on Starfleet, because that's sort of the unique thing about Star Trek, I do think there's a lot more to explore within the Star Trek franchise. And I think doing a Section 31 show allows that. And this trailer seems like it's going to be doing that. Nary was there a Starfleet uniform in sight, I believe, in that entire trailer, or very few of them. And so I think getting to see that part of it, very, very cool. That said, I will say the visuals I think were nice, but they also very much had that sort of, how do I explain this? Aimlessness of cinematography that I think kind of defines shows like Picard and Discovery, where they very clearly are using the volume, which I'm not a big fan of as much. Like, have these big cavernous sets, very like wide shots, very quick static moving camera, which, you know, on a TV show, I understand, like, you're working a little bit faster on a TV show budget, and so you have less time to focus as much on the cinematography. Yeah, I think you still can, but like there's less like intentionality, you know, because with TV sometimes you just like, we got to get this done. We have very limited time, so you sort of rely on what the structure of the show is. But with a movie, I would kind of want there to be a little bit more like grandiosity to it, and this really, just from the vibe, felt like a larger, like just a kind of like just another episode of Discovery visually. And so I'm sort of like, it's okay, but it didn't knock my socks off on that element of things. The other negative that I have here is there's a part of me that has a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth about Section 31 overall, is because there were two women writers that sort of pitched the original Section 31 TV show when it was going to be a show. And then over the years, like, who knew was Section 31 was going to happen? It kept being brought back up, and eventually it came to be what it is now, which is a sort of made for streaming movie. So it sort of very much got pushed down, and they also gave it to a new writer. And there's just part of me that's like, I'm sad that like a show that had two women showrunners sort of gets sort of scrunched down, pushed aside, and then given to someone else. So there's a little bit of sadness there. Obviously, who knows though what I'm not going to hold that against the movie itself. And it very much feels like the movie's even only getting made because Michelle Yeoh won an Oscar. So Paramount was like, well, we have her under contract, so let's do this. So I get, you know, that's how Hollywood works, but there's a little bit of sadness in that. That being said, I am excited for this format. Like, I don't know what their plan is on the back end, but, you know, there's two things that I could see coming out of this, which is, you know, if this does well, they might make that Section 31 series, so we might get a continuation of this beyond the movie. And then two, I am actually really excited for this format. I think that we should be doing more one-off movies in the Star Trek universe that are like not necessarily theater films, because dear God, like we all know Paramount Pictures can't figure that out for hell. Like there's been a billion Star Trek movies been announced, and who knows whenever they're gonna make one, if ever. So getting to like do like one-off stories on like movies made for streaming on like a lower budget, I think is actually a really cool idea. Like, do a Discovery movie that's on a lower budget. Maybe do a crossover film between, like, you know, Prodigy and Lower Decks, an animated movie. Like, there's a bunch of different ways that this format could be used. Bring back Deep Space Nine characters for a one-off Deep Space Nine movie, or do like a crossover Next Generation Deep Space Nine Voyager movie, or do like a one-off thing that has nothing to do with anything. Like, there's just a lot of potential with a like straight to movie streaming service Star Trek format that I am very much down for. So both as hopeful for this concept of Section 31, as well as the format of just a movie thing. I think that there's a lot of potential here, so very excited for Section 31. The trailer has me pumped for the style and just attitude of it. Like, I didn't talk about like I think there's a Beyonce song in there. Like, that's a new attitude for Star Trek. Some people will be put off by, but I love that this is like testing the waters for new things with Star Trek. So overall, very excited about it. Couple things here and there, but very pumped for Section 31. Now, The next thing that I want to talk about is Star Trek Lower Decks. So we got a trailer for Star Trek Lower Decks. I'm not going to go through, like, go to Trek Culture if you want, like, the piece by piece of, like, breaking down the trailer of, like, all the Easter eggs and stuff. I will just say this. I'm very excited for Lower Decks. Y'all know Lower Decks is my favorite ongoing Star Trek show right now. It's the one that speaks to my heart. I love it so much. I love the spirit of the show. I love the just the nerdiness about Star Trek about the show, but also, like, the characters and the people behind it. Like, it's just a show that speaks so much to me, and it is just like it's not the Star Trek show that I would make, like, if I went and pitched a show, but it's the Star Trek show that I, like, feel in my soul deeply, and, like, it feeds me. It's, like, made for me. So I love it. Unfortunately, it was canceled. They said season 5 it was the end of the show, and so they're selling it as the final season. However, during the panel, Mike McMahon, the showrunner, as well as Alex Kurtzman, the sort of overall head of Star Trek, both alluded to the fact that this is not the end of this story. Season 5 will be, as Mike McMahon, the end of a chapter, but the story can continue. And while they didn't necessarily say anything specific, they again alluded to, like Prodigy, that they want to do more and they need fans to be loud about it. So what my hope is because I there's a part of me that doubts that there would be a season 6 in the cards, even if, like, this did if it did gangbusters, maybe, and it would prove to Paramount. But I would be shocked if, like, an executive is like, well, we announced it as the final season, we're gonna bring it back for a season 6. Like, that feels like there's gonna, like, executives don't like to admit mistakes like that. So I doubt that would be in the cards. But what I'm thinking they might be angling for, kind of jumping off the Section 31 thing, is potentially a movie, like a Lower Decks movie that sort of continues the story. Like, even the trailer itself had a bit where it was like, oh, we want to tell more story.
Yeah, we're, like, very important.
All
and
right.
this is our last mission.
Yeah, right. We're not done voyaging.
We aren't?
So what I hope is if the season does well, we are loud about it, there might be a Lower Decks animated movie in the works. I think that would be actually a great continuation for the series. Like, do a movie, maybe a few movies, who knows? Do like that Futurama thing from a few years ago where they made those, like, 4 Futurama movies. I think was very fun. So maybe they're angling for a season 6, but my actual weird hope would be I would love them to do a or multiple Lower Decks films based off of building off of the end of season 5. So season 5 coming, excited about that, and still potential for it to continue. So please be vocal about that because I love my Lower Decks and I want it to continue so bad. But building off the Lower Decks news, however, something that made me very, very excited was the announcement that Tawny Newsome, who many of you know plays Mariner in Lower Decks, she's also a writer on the upcoming Star Trek Starfleet Academy show that I'll talk about in a second, but she is getting currently developing a Star Trek live-action comedy with Justin Simeon, a friend of hers, and the comedy, at least on the pitch, is a live-action show about a bunch of people living in a Federation resort planet who learn that their actions are being broadcast to the universe. I love this. Number one, live-action Star Trek comedy, here for. I think that's great. Again, builds off the stuff that I love about Lower Decks. I think that's perfect. Tawny Newsome is great for that. Her comedy is on point. You ever see her, like, do it, like, just speaking? She's such a funny person. Adore her. Also a very smart writer. She does the Is This Racist podcast. Always very thoughtful, very incisive. Like, she just has such a strong voice. And I'm also just here for getting more, like, people of color and women getting to be showrunners of Star Trek. Like, I love my Hageman brothers from Prodigy. I love my Mike McMahons from Lower Decks. Like, I love these people. I know them personally, and they are very, very sweet human beings, and I adore them, and I love their work. So I'm not knocking it, but, you know, especially with the cancellation of Discovery, which was a very diverse show behind and in front of the camera, but also had a lesbian woman running the show. And then to see that get canceled, and then, you know, all the other Star Trek shows that we had ongoing at this point were just run by dudes. I just, again, I don't want it to be like a tokenizing thing. It's more just like Star Trek is about being inclusive, diversing, celebrating the differences of everybody. And so I think we need to see more shows run by different voices, different perspectives. And so, you know, there's going to be the people like, because they're racist assholes, sexist assholes, whatever. And like I said, like, you know, just because someone's a certain background or identity doesn't mean that something's automatically going to be good. But I think Tawny's fantastic, and I think that this signals a very healthy thing for the franchise, which is giving more perspectives, opening up the viewpoints of the series, opening up the viewpoints of the franchise. I think Star Trek has been both sometimes at the forefront and also weirdly tepid about that in different points in its history. And so seeing this era like starting to continue to push that and evolve that, and then doing it in a way that like is with somebody that we like trust and think is awesome. Like Tawny kicks ass. Justin also seems like he kicks ass as well. Don't know as much about him as much, but he seems like he's awesome. So like I think that that's a good potential. The other thing with this too, beyond just being a live action comedy, which is an interesting setup for Star Trek, is the fact that it seems like it's not going to be centered on Starfleet as well. So something I said with Section 31, I'm glad we're getting to see more of the universe beyond Starfleet. So I think that that's a cool aspect of this here. So very pumped about that show. Obviously, we're in the early stages of that, so you know, we're probably several years off from whatever that show is going to be. But very excited for that to be even discussed at the moment. I think it signals a very healthy franchise at this point. This leads us to the final aspect of these announcements, which was Star Trek Starfleet Academy, which is the show that is closest to being on the horizon beyond like the stuff that we already know, like Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds. They're starting filming, I believe, but it's one that we kind of know not a lot about. We've gotten some casting announcements of a bunch of the kids in Starfleet Academy, and we also got some big casting announcements like we got Paul Giamatti, Holly Hunter are both going to be in the show. Paul Giamatti playing a villain. I think that's that's really, really cool. So just like some big names for the show already. Got a bunch of the kids cast, because it's an Academy show. So that's really interesting. But what they did announce at Hall H is that there are going to be a few recurring Star Trek characters from other Star Trek series showing up. The main ones were from Star Trek Discovery. Now, we knew Star Trek Starfleet Academy was kind of going to be built off and set in the same era, the 32nd century of Discovery. So it's not terribly surprising that we were going to get Jet Reno, Tig Notar's Jet Reno back, Oded Fehr, who played the sort of Admiral Vance on Discovery, as well as Mary Wiseman, who everyone kind of assumed was going to be in the show. She's announced to be back in this because she had been set up to go to Starfleet Academy at the end of Discovery. So like those three characters coming back, amazing. Again, I was very saddened by the end of Discovery. Like Discovery's like that messy ant. I have many problems with Discovery, but I loved its ethos. I loved what it was trying to do. I loved the spirit of it, even though I didn't. Sometimes I thought it was a messy show. So to see Starfleet Academy being a continuation of that, I love that. The big thing, though, was they announced that Robert Picardo, who played the Doctor in Star Trek Voyager, was coming back as a series regular to the show. Very pumped about this. Now, we have recently actually seen Robert Picardo back in Star Trek. He played the Doctor again in Star Trek Prodigy's second season. So he's not coming out completely out of the blue, but considering two things: one, him back in live action, amazing, and then two, this series is set 800 years or something like that, 32nd century, past Prodigy, and so that means like we're gonna see him in a whole new context, and also debate here is, the Doctor, he's a hologram, could theoretically live forever. So it could just be the Doctor from the Prodigy era, Star Trek Voyager era. However, there was an episode of Star Trek Voyager called Living Witness, where a copy of the Doctor was made and brought to activated in the future. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of that timeline, but essentially there's a timeline, there's a copy of the Doctor that was, at the end of that episode, heading back to the Federation. If you did the math, theoretically that Doctor was going to be able to get back to the Federation by the 32nd century, the time of Star Trek Discovery. So a lot of people theorized he might show up in Discovery, but having him here, I'm like, is this the Doctor from the Voyager era? Or is this the Living Witness Doctor that we're going to be getting? The copy of the Doctor. Both would be interesting. Here's a hot take on it. What if it's both? What if we get double the Robert Picardo in the show? That would be a lot of fun. Getting two Robert Picardos, both Doctors, and sort of tying off that nice little end cap there. I think that'd be kind of cute. That being said, between Robert Picardo and Paul Giamatti, is there enough space for these like older, grouchy, balding men in one show? We might be overwhelmed. So, but very excited about that. Like, that was the big news out of Starfleet Academy. Robert Picardo coming back. Loved that. One thing I will say, though, where are my Deep Space Nine comebacks? Like, we've gotten Voyager characters coming back now, like Robert Picardo, Janeway, Chakotay, and Prodigy as well. We have a bunch of Next Generation people in Star Trek Picard. Hell, 7 of 9 also in Picard as well. And we've gotten Constant Allusions to Deep Space Nine. We had one episode of Lower Decks where we got Kira and Quark back on Deep Space Nine. But we haven't got any like live action big like centering moments for Deep Space Nine or Enterprise for that matter. And those are my two favorites of the older series. So like, what the hell? Do you just hate me? Do you just hate me, Alex Kurtzman? So yeah, I want that. But as for this news, very excited about it. I believe that is everything that I had to say about this crop of news from Star Trek. Like I said, I have a lot more thoughts about Strange New Worlds and the specific clip they showed. Please check out that video that I did. I'll have it linked below as well. But beyond that, like I said, beyond that element of it where I have a little bit more negative thoughts, overall, I am very, very positive on the slate of current Star Trek shows coming out. Again, I've been up and down with Star Trek over the past few years. Love Lower Decks, love Prodigy, loved some stuff of Strange New Worlds, but a bit more mixed on it, especially after season 2. Picard, very mixed to negative on, and Discovery getting canceled also left a bad taste in my mouth, and then also Lower Decks and Prodigy left kind of bad taste in my mouth. But all of these shows seem to be, there's Star Trek announcing new stuff. They seem to be taking it in directions that are different and new, trying to do new things with Star Trek, getting some big names in there, centering different voices. The shows that are canceled still have avenues to potentially do more within. So I think like there's healthy stuff here, and there's a direction for the franchise overall, both in its storytelling, its structure, and who gets to tell these stories. That has me very excited. I'm like, you know what? More of this, please. So while I do have some trepidation about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, again, check out that video, I think on the whole, I feel very positive about where Star Trek is. As a Star Trek fan, I'm excited by these announcements, and we'll see where it goes. So that's my thoughts on this current, time period of Star Trek at the moment. I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below, but beyond all that, my friends, live long and prosper.